Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the City Waterloo Special Council meeting, Monday, May 25th, 2020 at 10 a.m. First on the agenda is a roll call. Can you go in ward order, please?
Good morning, Councillor Hanmer, Ward 1, present.
Councillor Bodley, present.
Councillor Beath, Ward 3, present.
Councillor Freeman, Ward 4, present. Councillor Vasic, present.
Councillor Henry, present.
Councillor Bonagola, present.
Thank you all, and the mayor is here too. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pause to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. Could I have disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Hearing none, we'll move towards the approval of minutes. Item number 5, there's 3 sets of minutes. I'm wondering if Ward 1 and Ward 2 would consider moving and seconding.
Sandra, Councillor Hanmer, I move the motion to approve the 3 sets of minutes and vote in favor.
Thank you.
Councillor Bodley seconds the motion and votes in favor as well.
Excellent. We'll go to Ward 3.
Councillor Beath, in favor of the motion.
Councillor Freeman, in favor of the motion.
Councillor Vasic, in favor.
Councillor Henry, in favor.
Councillor Bonagola, in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too, so that carries unanimously. Next up, we have the consent motion, and there's items A through F. Are there any to be removed? Hold on. Are there any to be removed from any councillor? Hearing none, I would look to Ward 3 and Ward 4 to move, second, and vote, please.
Councillor Beath, Ward 3, move the motion and support the motion. Vote in favor.
Thank you.
Councillor Freeman, Ward 4, I second the motion and also vote in favor of it.
Okay, we'll go to Ward 5.
Councillor Vasic, in favor.
Councillor Henry, in favor.
Councillor Bonagola, in favor.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. No items removed from the consent motion. Staff reports. First up under item 9A, 2020 tax adjustments, prepared by Robin. And do I have any questions on that? Hearing none. Since this is a finance item, perhaps I'll go with Councillor Henry and then Ward Jen, I guess.
Councillor Henry, happy to move the motion and support the motion.
Thank you.
Councillor Vasic, I'm just curious if that's a formal renaming of the ward to Ward Jen versus Ward 5, Mayor. Just kidding. But I second it and am in favor.
Teleconference levity. I like it. Let's go to Ward to Neil.
Councillor Bonagola here. I'm in favor.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
Councillor Beath, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
And the mayor is in favor too. That carries unanimously. Item B, financial impact of COVID-19 update report number 2. And I'll look to, again, another finance item to Councillor Henry for any commentary or to move it.
Sure, happy to move it, and after a second, I'll have a comment and question.
Thank you. And I'll go to Ward 7 for a second.
I am happy to second. I also have comments and a question.
Excellent. Okay, back to Councillor Henry, then to Councillor Bonagor.
So
and I
first,
have questions.
Yeah. So first, by way of comment, I want to express my appreciation for staff. First, the area treasurers of all of the area municipalities in Waterloo Region for continuing to look at what we can and should do to be able to support our residents and businesses in these challenging times, and in the context of the significant support from federal and provincial levels of government, whose resources and abilities in that area are far more significant than ours. I appreciate the opportunity that we can provide to extend relief for everyone through the month of June, but also to make sure we are targeting it to those who need it. That's applying an appropriate lens of equity in the condition of very challenging financial circumstances. And of course, there are a number of other support measures for business that is in here that we hope will certainly help in the context of others to keep people afloat. By way of a question, I think based on who's on the call, I'll ask this of Mr. Anderson. One thing that I don't see in the list of recommendations, but that I understand we are participating in, is programs connecting the Economic Development Department with the Waterloo Region Small Business Center. I know our neighbors south of Union have been very vocal about their support and participation in that, but I know we're participating too, and I was wondering if Mr. Anderson could speak to that as something we're doing that isn't listed here in the recommendations, but I think is going to be incredibly important for businesses in Waterloo.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Henry, absolutely. Our small business center is working in collaboration with the offices out of Kitchener and Cambridge, and doing some significant outreach to the small business operators in our own local community, as well as providing a number of training opportunities for those that are working their ways through some of the federal funding programs and some of the application processes. And so, yes, very active on that front. I believe there's been some significant promotion on social media, and we can continue to do that as we move forward here.
Thank you. And I do know we have some staff helping out on that as well, which is a good thing. Over to Councillor Bonagor and then to Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. First of all, I also wanted just to thank everyone who's been able to keep paying their bills on time. Being able to have that cash flow really means that we can better help the people who need it most. So I just wanted to publicly thank people who've been able to keep up with that. We really appreciate it. I've got a couple of comments on a couple of the programs and then a question for staff. So the first is about the parking relief. I mean, I appreciate the extension of businesses are doing it tough right now, a good number of them, but I'm hesitant to see this blanket exemption become too permanent. We're about to have a discussion about how we can better use public land for public good. And I think I would appreciate, beyond this 1 month extension, I would appreciate exploring other options for ways to support businesses who may be struggling with parking while others may not be. Like perhaps it's something that's application based or an alternative. But I would, as we continue our discussion about how we can best use the public land at our disposal, I think we need to be very cognizant of the messages that we're sending and directing the support where it's most needed. For the graffiti removal program uptown, I think it was a great idea for staff to propose this 1 year covering of the VA's expenses. This makes the VIA more able to, fund and support local business owners in a really tangible way. So it's a great move. One note of caution though, I would be very hesitant to see this become a permanent line item in our budget. So I very much appreciate this being listed as a temporary 1 year support. So thank you. And my question is regarding a portable sign fee. I know that in the report we state that they will be strongly recommending that this saving be passed on. Can someone explain to me why this can't be mandated? I mean, we enforce the signage fees. How are we limited from enforcing the passing on of this benefit?
So it's Mark Dykstra chiming in here. So through Mayor Dworsky to Councillor Bonagor, the process that occurs is the sign vendor typically takes out the permit on behalf of the retail operation, and we've seen that that savings is sometimes, or that whole fee is just incorporated into a general sign permit cost that the vendor would see as a bottom line, so the permit isn't necessarily split out. So that's why we're noting that, and we will take steps to communicate that and emphasize that moving forward.
I know you said there are plans to communicate that to the sign operators. Are there also efforts to communicate that to businesses so that they know that they can advocate for that savings for themselves?
Definitely, that's a communication we can reinforce, and whether it's the BIA or other broader entities, we can do that, Councillor.
Okay, that's great. Many thanks.
And there's probably an opportunity for Tony in the council messaging going forth from this meeting to perhaps to mention that as well. I'll leave that to Tony for consideration. Over to Councillor Bodley.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. A question broadly, I guess, on the financial impact summary that we received, so presumably to Keshwar. I'm totally understood, and the note that's in the report talking about how these projections are based on best available data, and obviously things are going to change very rapidly given the situation that we're dealing with. I'm hoping that, Keshwar, you might be able to speak to some of the shifts in the overall net impact as to what is happening to the city's finances. I note that for March and April, we are now projecting a shortfall of 500, or perhaps it's no longer a projection, given that it's May, but we have a number of $519,000 shortfall. That was $254,000 in a previous report. And then for May, we're projecting $732,000 versus $556,000. And in June, we're projecting $634,000 versus $189,000. So all of these numbers have gone up, perhaps not surprisingly. I'm hopeful that, Keshwar, you might be able to speak to some of the broad, I guess, pressures that we're dealing with that are causing these numbers to increase.
Hi, this is Keshwar answering Councillor Bodley's questions. Thank you, Councillor Bodley. Those are some good observations. And when we did the report in March, April, we were doing this basically on projections and best estimates. So as we're getting the real data and the real reports as we're closing off each month, there's less and less of forecasting and estimation that needs to be done. So we are looking at the real numbers then for March and April. Right now for May, there's a bit of forecasting in here. For June, there's almost full forecasting. So as these months get finalized, we're dealing with real data, so the numbers do change. So when it comes to areas in terms of our revenue losses, now we know what the real revenue losses are, as well as certain goals that we may have set for ourselves with respect to any administrative savings. We are looking and seeing have we been able to accomplish any of those. So in addition to it, as we are going through the months, we're finding that we do need to buy additional items like PPEs. And so some of them were estimates, but as we're making those actual purchases, as the prices are changing, we're encountering that some of those costs are going up. So there will always be that fluctuation. So March and April are the real costs that we've seen. May and June are more the forecast. And as we look at further reports, probably later in the year, we will look at projecting even to the end of the year. So this is really the best estimate based on a combination of real data and forecasting. And as we start reopening and starting our recovery efforts, you will see the numbers start changing again, because how we staff up, how we start our programs is going to be very different. And moving forward, you cannot expect that where we were able to run a class with 20 participants, we won't be able to have that many. So once again, there's a lot of variables out there. And so it is quite a challenge trying to estimate what our losses are going to be. So I hope this is helpful in terms of explaining why we have some fluctuation in our numbers.
Very much so. I wonder if you could, and I absolutely 100% appreciate that that particularly in our first report that these were estimates that we're basing off of a very, very challenging and shifting situation. I guess my follow-up is, in general, are you the difference between this financial impacts report and the previous one? Are we seeing that it's that we've seen less revenue coming in than we thought, or higher expenses than we anticipated, or struggling with the reduction or the mitigation of expenses? Would you attribute the changes being to one of those three categories versus another, or across the board? Where are we seeing the biggest sort of shifts?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I would, Philippa Reynolds is also on the call, and her team has pulled the report together, so I would really ask Philippa to speak to some of the more details, if she's able to answer that question, Councillor Bodley.
Philippa, if you're on the line, your microphone might not be working.
Oh, can you hear me?
Go. Now you're good.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me? Just checking again, because I took it off and put it back on again.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So to Councillor Bodley's question, it's really a combination of things. So it is both some higher expenses than we had originally forecast for March and April, as well as some higher reduced revenues as well for that same period. So it really is a combination. But the April report, for example, tax-based side for March, the net impact was $203,000. That's what we had projected at that time, 204. And for the same time period now, we're saying it's 332. And it is a combination of a little bit more expense and a little bit more reduced revenue. Same thing in April. It's higher though. And so in April, we had identified a net of $325,000, and the net in this report is $631,000. I'm focusing on tax just for simplicity at this point in time. And that $300,000 difference is really a combination. There's about $100,000 from reduced revenues that are actually higher now than they were forecasted to be, as well as the difference is $200 in expense. And it is really over several different lines. So there's a little bit more on the labor side than we had projected, probably about $60,000, and then the balance over several various lines in that table. So it's not any one individual main driver. It's really a combination of things that is causing that differential. I think that, as time goes on, of course, and we learn more and more, hopefully we can close those gaps earlier on as we're forecasting. But we'll be able to deal with that on a monthly basis as we we get more information under our belts. When we were first forecasting, we were relying a fair bit on historical information in some ways, like what would we normally achieve as compared to last year. And that is not always strictly COVID related, so it can be quite difficult to isolate the effects of this specific pandemic as opposed to perhaps cyclical, seasonal, like weather related, all sorts of things that could affect our revenues, for example, and our expenses as well. So we're trying to narrow that down and learn from what we're experiencing with each report so that we can get more and more precise.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Felipe and Keshwar. Appreciated.
And that response was so excellent, Councillor Hanmer has had her question answered, so we'll send her off the list. And I believe that is it for questions. Hearing no further questions, we'll take the vote. We'll start with Ward 1. I forgot where we are.
Thank you. It's Councillor Hanmer, and I am in favor of the motion.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Beath in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
And Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too, so that carries unanimously. Thank you, staff, for the great work on this program that includes financial support for our neighborhoods in the tune of $5,000 as well. A lot of other things were covered, so very, very, very good. Let's hopefully this helps out people with their cash flow during the pandemic. Item C, public participation and delegations, a report prepared by Julie Scott. Could I have Ward 1, 2 do the move and second, then we'll see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Hanmer, I am happy to make the motion, and I vote in favor.
Councillor Bodley seconds the motion, votes in favor.
Okay, and I have a question from Councillor Henry.
So not to cut off the voting that seemed a bit, hopefully not too premature. I was just wondering, Julie, if you could paint us a picture of, one, how the, June and future meetings of council might look. So I think we can understand how public participation, will sort of shake out. But the other more detailed question I have was on our, statutory committees of, say, Committee of Adjustment and others that are meeting to understand what that looks like. Are we effectively transitioning to, paper hearings in that way? Because it seems there's a multi-meeting, delay and things that are being read rather than engaged on. So I'm just not sure how, what if anything is changing there, or if I'm reading it too narrowly.
Sure. So really what the report today does is provide us with some options. So for public council meetings, for open meetings of council, I should say, delegations can continue to submit in writing. And on non-agenda items, we will be receiving those in writing only. But we will be moving forward with a newer version of WebEx, which will allow us to call out and have delegations participate electronically by audio on the meeting. This enables us to start moving forward with Planning Act public meetings. We will still be looking at those types of items that are coming forward, recognizing that not everyone is comfortable with participating in a meeting electronically, and not everyone has the technology available at home, but it does give us that option for meetings of council to allow for a mix of in-writing delegations and electronic participation delegations. For Committee of Adjustment and the Municipal Heritage Committee, it is a little bit more complicated because we have volunteers that are members of the committee that may or may not have the same technology at home that we have been able to provision for members of council. So the recommendation from the division is to move forward with those meetings. they will be live streamed in the same way that council meetings are live streamed. So people could submit comments in writing in advance of the hearing. They'll have an opportunity to listen to the hearing live. The difference is that they will not have an opportunity to participate electronically if they're a member of the public that has a comment on the item at hand. The recommendation, and it's more of an internal procedure, will be that there'll be an extended window where following the hearing, where it has been live streamed and then posted on YouTube, members of the public will have an opportunity to write in with additional comments. So a decision will not be made at the first hearing. There will be a second hearing where all of the comments received within that consultation window are considered, deliberated, and the decision is made. So that is specifically for the statutory committees. And then the third set are the advisory committees of council. So those will be electronic only meetings. We will not be live streaming those meetings, but we will be working with staff if there are members of the public that are interested. We don't typically see members of the public attending the advisory committees of council. And the advisory committees of council don't follow the Municipal Act in the same way that council does. However, we do have a committee policy that deals with how they can meet, whether it's open or closed, and in what mechanism. And I should add that for the advisory committees, the provision for meeting electronically will only be so long as there are physical distancing measures in place, because we recognize that much of the committee work is really a free-flowing discussion, which is very difficult to achieve on electronic meetings. So this will be only during the period where physical distancing measures are in place, so that it really makes it difficult to find a meeting room space where everyone could meet and maintain a distance.
Thanks, Julie. That's helpful clarity.
Thank you. Now, I do have further questions, and I have Councillor Vasek, Bonagor, Freeman. So go ahead, Councillor Vasek.
Hi, thanks for you, Mayor Jaworski. Thanks for this report. My question is about mandatory attendance, and I'm just curious if mandatory attendance, if there concessions will be made for mandatory attendance at advisory committee meetings or otherwise, I guess, and how the city might be able to support people not necessarily attending. I mean, because there's about like 3 hours of work, extra work a month between meetings and preparing for the meetings, and 3 hours isn't a ton, but it is a lot right now, and everyone's so stretched for time. So just curious what the approach is there.
Thank you, Councillor Vasek. We are very well aware that we're relying on volunteers to move this committee work forward. And one of the first things that we will be doing this week is actually surveying all of our members to find out if they have the capacity to continue volunteering at this time, and if they are interested in participating in the electronic meeting. We will not hold lack of attendance against anyone at this stage. We would not move forward with removing anyone from a committee because they cannot attend during this phase. And we do recognize that people have a lot of additional burdens at home right now, and they may not have the capacity to continue on. So this is really to enable those that are able to get together and meet and discuss to continue working and moving forward, but recognizing that this is not something that everyone has a capacity for right now, and nor are they necessarily comfortable participating in these meetings. For the most part, our committee terms do end in November, and we would normally be starting recruitment in September. We will be taking a look at that and seeing what the landscape is like in September. But we would not at any point bring forward a report to remove someone because they can't attend while it's in the electronic meeting format or while we're still in the pandemic emergency.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful. And then just one other question. Curious, it just popped into my head really early this morning about the IAP2 training that staff are doing. So does IAP2 have any best practices that are coming out that we can draw on or that we are drawing on for public participation at this time?
Thank you, Councillor Vasic, and Tony may want to add a little bit more to this, but it is something that our communications division has been very involved with and have taken the training, and they are working closely with other divisions and teams in the city to ensure that we're drawing on those best practices and recommendations and engaging the public through a variety of means. So it does not mean that it's all electronic, but exploring different ways of getting information and involving the public and engaging them, and whether that is mail drops to neighborhoods where there's specific projects going on, perhaps the use of print advertising to direct people to the website. So using a really large variety of tools to engage the public and not just relying on any one means.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you, Councillor Vasic. Over to Councillor Bonagor, then Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just have one question, but before that, I just want to say the advisory committees on which I sit, I think they've been itching to get back at it. So I think that you will have some people in the community very thankful for the changes that could come under this. But I was just curious about one section of the report that was looking at public information centres and that kind of public consultation. And while I know that we've put on hold many of the projects that would require that kind of input, as we move forward, you quite rightly have flagged this as something we need to be considering. That just raises a flag for me, given how on some topics it's been a real struggle to reach people online and to get strong feedback from the community online. So I was just wondering if there have been additional supports or additional actions planned to help the communications team and to help project teams kind of reach as many people as we can going forward.
Through the chair to Councillor Bonagor, yes, I know that the teams, particularly the capital project teams, have been looking at this because as long as the gathering orders restrictions remain in place, we won't be able to have those public information drop-in person sessions, which have been very helpful. So they're looking at a variety of things, including mail drops to neighborhoods with additional information door-to-door, having that additional content available on the website with phone numbers and email addresses where people can contact to find out more information or to perhaps offer suggestions, and using Engage Waterloo substantially more in these types of projects. So it is a restriction that will remain in place as long as the gathering limits remain, and the staff are going to use a variety of different tools to reach out and to not only inform, but also in some cases to seek a consensus on certain plans for communities.
That sounds great. And if there's anything I can do within my ward to help with that, please don't hesitate to tap me on the shoulder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bonagor. And Julie, over to Councillor Freeman, please.
Thank you to Mayor Jaworski. I did want to echo what Councillor Bonagor said. I think that a lot of advisory committees are pretty would like to get working again. And in particular, I'd like to speak to the WACAT committee because we're dealing with a motion later today that I know that many of the committee members have participated in. They would have loved to have been able to come together electronically to actually form a motion, and I suspect in support of Councillor Henry's motion. And it's that time of year where the WACAT committee is full of people who are out and about, and they're looking at our transportation networks, and they really want to be able to capture their thoughts more formally through a committee setting. So I'm sure that there's lots of committees that feel the same, and I did want to share the sentiments that I've heard coming through on the WACAT committee. And with regard to the public meetings, it is a concern to me, and it would be really helpful if we could get a sense of what are 2 or 3 or, what's the handful of major projects that we're trying to advance that really would have had a major public information component, and how we can think to do differently on that. Because one of the ones that comes to mind for me right now is the Transportation Master Plan, and I feel as though there just hasn't been enough outreach to the general public to get those comments in, and I don't think that's the only plan. So it would be really helpful to get a sense of, what are some of the projects that are just critical. I don't want the TMP, for example, to advance without really feeling as though we've heard from the public on it. It's just too important of a document. So I guess it's more of comments than questions. I'm happy to hear others' thoughts on the matter.
Thank you.
No, I think that's good. I think that's good for hearing from perhaps Mr. Anderson on that topic.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Freeman, no, really, really good thoughts. I think all of our minds are turning to new and creative ideas, in addition to what Julie has noted, and on how we kind of can engage the public differently in this COVID-19 era and with physical distancing requirements. So I think leave that with us. I think we can, as Councillor Freeman noted, maybe identify those top projects and maybe put a little bit of a communications plan together at a high level, and perhaps share that with council in a briefing note, and bring that forward at our next council meeting as well for some further discussion. But we welcome those comments from council. Thank you.
Yeah, good commentary there, Councillor Freeman. I don't see anybody further on the list. And I know Ward 1 and 2 have moved and voted. Everything is still the same. Question from, I was going to say Councillor Julie. Julie, go ahead.
I did want to just add that we will be working with staff as well in ensuring that restarting these committees fits within their business recovery plans. And there will be some work that is needed before they can get started, because we need to make sure that we're using the consistent platform, and that our staff are available to assist for the first meeting. So we won't be able to hold all of our committee meetings within the first few weeks of June. It is going to take a little bit of time to phase these back into a restart, but we will be reaching out to staff as well to find out who has the capacity to restart the committees sooner than later, and who has the technology available as well.
Thank you, Julie. We'll continue the vote with Ward 3 onwards, please.
Councillor Veith votes in favor. Thank you.
Councillor Freeman's in favor.
Councillor Vasek in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor, so that carries unanimously. Thank you very much for working that through, Julie. I think everybody's chomping at the bit to get back and to do some work, roll up their sleeves, and get some stuff done to help us all out. We're actually down to notice of motion prepared by Councillor Henry that we were just casually mentioning. So I'll go to Councillor Henry, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I think before we can talk about this, I need to move waiving of notice of motion and look for a seconder.
And I think Councillor Bodley had chatted about that, so I'll ask Councillor Bodley.
Councillor Bodley, yes, I will waive notice of motion. Second that. Thank you.
And I guess now let's vote on the remaining councillors. So let's go Ward 1, 3, etc.
Councillor Hanmer in favor of waiving the notice of motion.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasek in favor.
And Councillor Bonagor in favor of waiving the notice of motion.
And the mayor's in favor too. Now, Councillor Henry, I assume you'll give details on this. I haven't read out what the notice of motion is, but I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Sure, and I think since a lot of the rationale is embedded in it, I think reading it is helpful, especially given we're in an audio focused council meeting. So I'll start by doing that. Whereas public health directives to combat COVID-19 include staying at home except when making essential trips, including for physical activity where physical distancing must be maintained. And whereas people living on quiet, tree-lined residential streets or near parks have different experiences of safety, calm, and respite when walking or cycling for physical activity than people living on major roadways or in park-deficient neighborhoods. And whereas people using public and active transportation for essential trips have different experiences of safety and different abilities to physically distance on their journeys than those using personal vehicles. And whereas people living in apartments have different experiences of staying at home than those living in low-density, ground-oriented housing with front and backyards. And whereas a recent survey of public transit users in Toronto suggests 25% of riders will not return to public transit until there is a coronavirus vaccine, and that some public transit trips are already being replaced with automobile trips, which raises concerns about how quickly Waterloo Region residents will return to public transit as more workplaces are reopened. And whereas the City of Waterloo's strategic plan emphasizes increased use of sustainable modes of transportation as part of addressing the climate change crisis, in its existing and draft transportation master plans and the approved station area plan provide a clear strategy to enable significantly more use of active transportation. Therefore, be it resolved that Council directs staff to assess opportunities to quickly and affordably expand active transportation infrastructure to facilitate essential trips and to provide more equitable access to safe, green spaces for essential trips, including for physical activity, while permitting physical distancing. And that Council direct staff to use a pilot or interim design approach to implement these opportunities where appropriate to elicit feedback from the public to guide more permanent approaches, and that Council requests that the Region of Waterloo undertake a similar assessment in coordination with area municipalities, and that the Region specifically include eliminating pedestrian-activated intersection controls in that assessment, and that Council directs staff to consult the ward councillor on any opportunities staff plan to implement in their ward, and to inform Council and the public as implementation occurs, which may happen in phases. So that is, I suppose that's moving it. I'd look for a seconder, and then I'm happy for folks generally to ask questions about it, and I'll be happy to wrap with comments and further questions.
Thank you. I'll go back to Councillor Bodley. The second.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Bodley here. Happy to second the motion.
Okay. Jeff, do you want to have a say now on anything, or maybe I'll go to Councillor Bodley, Councillor Bonagor, see what they have to say.
I'm happy for you to go to others. I'll just say, briefly in terms of waiving notice and doing this more quickly, since the frequency of our council meetings is slower and the need is faster. Waiving notice was appropriate in this time, and I think we all tried our best to make sure that we got input from the public quickly, and that certainly came in more on this item than on many items over the weekend, as we received, I think, 16 individual pieces of correspondence on this matter. So appreciate the public's quick engagement on providing some feedback and input before today. But I'm looking forward to the discussion and the questions and comments others have.
Excellent. And from my standpoint, thank you for bringing this forward. There's been lots of chat in social media on this topic, and I think it's very vital for the community. So I'm going to go with Councillor Bodley to see if you have any comments on as seconder, then Councillor Bonagor, Hanmer, Vasic I have here, and Councillor Veith. Please go ahead, Councillor Bodley, if you have anything.
Sorry, I was formulating my thoughts. You threw me under the bus here, Mayor Jaworski, but that's okay.
You can go later if you want.
I would like to hear the comments and questions from others if possible first, and then maybe I'll
sure.
pre-wrap up and let Councillor Henry fully wrap up if that's okay.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll go with Councillor Bonagor, Hanmer, Vasek, Veith, Bodley.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. So I have a couple of questions, and then unlike my colleague, Councillor Bodley, I actually prepared some thoughts earlier. Sorry, mate. So first of all, the main question for me, I love what I'm seeing here, but I was left with the question, where does a slower residential speed limit fit into this? Dropping the residential speeds to 40 or even 30 kilometres an hour was already on our radar, pardon the pun. But now, we've got more people out walking, we're stepping onto streets to give each other room. It seems like it could be the perfect time to strongly consider and possibly implement it. So were there reasons to not include that at this time?
Okay,
sounds like a question for the mover.
Yeah, it is. It would sound like a question for Mr. Rapp, but maybe I'll go to the mover and then we'll see.
Question to anyone who cares to answer. How about that?
Yeah,
I will start. I'm happy to. Dave, I'm happy to start and then flip it to Cam, because the formulation of the question was, why was this not included? And since I was the drafter, then that's most directly to me. But I'm happy to have Mr. Rapp say more. I would say the approach I took in crafting the resolution was not to propose any specific project or any specific action. We have, but instead to set policy and direction, principles and values, and an expectation of timeliness of action for the staff that we pay, who are expert and capable and have budgets to consider, timing to consider, and other protocols and rules and responsibilities and regulations to consider as they formulate strategies. And so I tried to keep it at the high level of policy direction from Council with principles and values to help staff prioritize those and to indicate an expectation of speed. And with that, I'm happy to have Mr. Rapp answer further, because one of my addendum questions was, where does this sort of go from here? How is staff sort of taking that? And I think Councillor Bonagor's suggestion or thought is a good launching point for one of the potential avenues I think I'd expect that staff will be looking at.
Certainly. Can everyone hear me? Just to double check it's Cam.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay. No, Councillor Henry's correct that the resolution that's in front of Council right now is, I'll call it generic enough, open enough, as Councillor Henry noted, more policy directive, that we as staff can choose to take a look at a number of different tools in the toolbox, if you will, that being one of those being the 40K. The one additional comment, though, I'd like to add to the reduction to speed limit, if staff comes forward with a proposal for a reduction in a couple of different areas, it would require an extra step, and that is we would have to bring forward a implementing bylaw to sign it and bylaw it accordingly. So it would require an extra step, and I'm not suggesting that that doesn't mean we wouldn't come forward with something. It would just mean it's a little bit slower to implement, that's all. Similar to the Montpellier bylaw report that was on earlier in consent, those type of legislative changes, we have to come through with bylaws. But as I noted, the resolution that's in front of you does not limit staff in any way of coming up with different ideas. It's just a case of, depending what those ideas are, how can we implement? Some can be done at a staff level, and we proceed. And then, as the resolution suggests, elicit feedback from that interim design that's out there as people are living with it. Or it could be coming back with a bylaw to change a speed limit or signage in one way or the other. Coming back to Councillor Henry in his one comment or question about what next, essentially, the staff of active and autonomous transportation are aware of this resolution, and I'm
positive there will be some ideas that can come forward rather quickly. Based on what those ideas are, we'll be taking a look at where we have operating budget to advance things, and I'm certain we will, depending on what we come up with. And if it's something that requires additional funding, then that's another example of where we would come back to council and ask for the funding. With obviously, we'd come forward with a proposal of how to fund it, work with our finance group. But that's sort of the next step. The nice thing about this resolution is it does give staff direction that we can do some things, because members of the public, not everyone will be enamored with whatever we come up with, even if it's a simple sign. And they would question why we are doing it and where's our authority lie, and this gives us that support to start doing some things. That's what I can offer at this moment until I reach out more with staff and we can brainstorm.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Rapp. Back to Councillor Bonagor.
Yes, thank you for that additional information. And yes, it's not only giving you permission to do it, it's also like saying very clearly we must do these things. So go for gold, aim big, and bring us some great ideas. Now, my next question is, given the fact that we're in a two-tier region and a lot of the busiest crunch points in our transportation network are regional roads, are we already working with the region to discuss possible changes on their roads as well? A question for whoever can
Mr. Rapp or Mr. Anderson.
Certainly, I can take the first crack at that. The Critical Infrastructure Control Group, and actually a subgroup of that, if you will, because the townships are not necessarily involved. But the region, Cambridge, Kitchener, and Waterloo, we have assigned people to work together because they're obviously a network needs to talk within itself with the regional level and at the city level, as our infrastructure does touch and cross each other. The pathways, the roads, the sidewalks, all of them blend together. So that group, as I said, we've already assigned names to that group, and this will give at least the Waterloo rep further direction of how our council would like to proceed. And with council, if council passes this, then I will bring it forward also to the Critical Control Infrastructure Group that I think we're meeting on Thursday this week. I'll double check, but I'll make sure that they're aware of it and that our staff rep has it as well.
That's great. Thank you. And Mayor Jaworski, I just have some comments on the motion in general, if I may.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, as we've seen, climate change modelling shows that pandemics will likely become more frequent, and we can use this experience and honour the people who have tragically died from the virus to build something stronger. With smart decisions, we can still embrace density and urbanism. I think that's an important message to get out to residents in the city. We already have a head start with Uptown's widened sidewalks and the region's bike lane pilot, and now we need to build on that so people feel that they can safely travel without retreating to their cars. We need creative ideas for transit and clever uses for public space. And this motion explicitly instructs staff to bring us those ideas. So I will be supporting the motion, but I think we need to be clear that this needs to be the beginning of something bigger. We need streets and greenhouses that are flexible and are known to be flexible so that they can safely meet changing needs. Many of our trails cross multiple roads. So we need to be looking at these roads and considering changes to them, possibly temporary ones at first, to protect the trail users. And I also want to see bold ideas to repurpose parking lots. it's going to be a long time before offices are as full as they were. And even if there are more people in their cars, we need to still think of the greater good here. We could be using this public land for massive public good. Using public land for, to store private vehicles, it comes at a social cost. Parking is never truly free. So this is our chance to show people how at least portions of this land could be used for people. As for the beg button clause, these are the bane of existence for many people in Uptown. I've been advocating behind the scenes on this, and I can say loudly and clearly that we need to change how we treat pedestrians in this region. They cannot and they should not come second to cars. So yes, I will be supporting this motion very happily, but I want to be clear, there is much more to do, and we need this to be just the start. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bonigar. Over to Councillor Hanmer, Vasek, Veets, Freeman. Bodley.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. Through you, the questions I was going to raise have been answered, so I will just offer a comment. I too am very much in favor of the motion as it's gone forward, and do look at it as a beginning to how we're going to connect all of our transportation routes throughout the city. And I appreciate the looking at pilots or interim design approaches in the very near future to see what we can learn from that as we further explore what can happen on an ongoing and a permanent basis. There definitely is a shift in how we need to be able to accommodate all transportation means, and also to ensure that we're keeping everyone as safe as possible. To Councillor Bonigar's comment, I appreciate the eliminating the pedestrian activated intersections. I just view it with caution, though. In Uptown, where there is much more pedestrian traffic and an opportunity for us to not have it there, I worry about some of the activated intersections we have in outlying areas, and being a ward that is further on the west side and doesn't have as many green spaces where lots of pedestrians are walking, there's lots more biking, just in caution in how much we take that apart. I do appreciate, though, that we have to take a holistic approach to how the transportation changes and the network changes need to be made. In particular with COVID-19 and responding to the pandemic now, and as we are getting back or renewing the business opportunities, it is important that we as a city are leading in how our residents can be meeting the distancing requirements that we have, getting outside to have fresh air as they need to help all of us better fight the spread of the pandemic, and move forward. I do appreciate that staff will be coming up with lots of ideas, and I certainly do look forward to those. And I am hopeful that we are going to be able to implement some very quick solutions so that we can get the feedback on what needs to happen on a more broader basis for our city. So thank you to Councillor Henry for bringing this forward. I really appreciate all the support or the comments that we received over the weekend, and I agree it's probably been the quickest, the fastest and the most amount we've had in to a particular motion like this. So there's no question there's good public interest in moving forward with these initiatives at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanmer. Over to Councillor Vasek.
Thanks through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thanks, Councillor Henry, for bringing this forward. I'm really excited about it. I'm fully in support of it. I also just want to say that I'm really grateful to be on a council that has 4 of its 6 strategic pillars aligned with this motion, to say that we enabled this through our strategic planning process, and that's really, really exciting. It makes me pretty, like I said, grateful to be on a council that with smaller resources, because we are a smaller city, we're a mid-sized city, is able to move maybe not as fast as everyone would have liked, but really fast in comparison perhaps to other cities our size. So I think kudos to staff, kudos to council, kudos to people who messaged and advocated for this along the way and sent notes in on the weekends. I'm really excited about all of that. It's a real example of people coming together during this time again. My question is just practical in nature. So if this passes, just curious as a ward councillor, what's the best process for us to forward areas of concern to staff for their investigation or exploration?
I'll go to Mr. Rapp for that. Or if Cam.
Sorry
Oh,
about that. I was having trouble with my mouse, actually. The best, probably as council members, hear from anybody within their constituency, if you will, or have heard of ideas. If you want to pass those on to myself and Christine Kaler, the Director of Transportation, then we can make sure that that's sort of in the brainstorming session, if you will. And as noted in the motion, that as we come up with ideas that will be centered or decided to be located within a ward, we will reach out to that ward councillor and the mayor in advance of us doing anything. That it's sort of just, I guess, a caution, if you will, for us that if we're proposing something and you've heard from a lot of people that already that wouldn't like that, just in passing, then we'd like to hear it. We don't want our council or our staff going down a hornet's nest, but we'll work with the ward councillor of both receiving ideas and letting them know what our thoughts are within the ward, if that helps.
Great, yeah, that's great, and I'm glad that was in the motion too, and that's a helpful process just to do something similar. Just a thought for your consideration, whether it works or not, but to initiate a traffic calming study, there's just that really easy form that residents can fill out. So I'm just curious if that's a similar process that might be helpful rather than keeping track of all of the emails that might come from council. So just a thought, but if it works.
If I can just add, what we're thinking of right now, short term, and again, when I say what we're thinking of, I have nothing in mind, but we're not looking at going out and having people fill out forms or anything at this point. We'll be trying to do some quick things, work with the ward councillor, and then receive comments as people are living with it, if you will. And then we'll decide on what variation or modifications we need to make to the design, or whether it's in the right location, but work with council on that information. But we'll just keep track of a simple list as information comes in or suggestions come in. Councillor Vasek.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Cam.
Yeah, and I think we're hearing general consensus that it's better to do something sooner rather than later, and if we can work through it quickly, like the process you just described, Cam, is probably the best way forward at this point, and we'll go from there. Over to Councillor Veith, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. Thanks, Councillor Henry, for pulling this together. I've heard lots, well, the communication we got on the weekend, but I've also heard from people when the bike lanes went in, for instance. So I'm just shining up my suit of armor because. And like Cam said, I don't want to get into any hornet's nests, but that I'm prepared for that because there's a lot of folks that, and not just people from my ward that are approaching me and just, a lot of people believe that the car is still king here in this area. And anyway, but that being said, I totally support the motion, and yeah, thanks. Just putting that out there.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, through you. I think that Councillor Veith is fair to identify that it's not going to be received well by everyone. But I really appreciate that Councillor Henry, who lives in a high-density residential building and who is personally living and experienced raising a toddler around busy intersections. I really appreciate how you've shaped this motion and brought some reality to what living in a high-density neighborhood looks like and how it is that we need to think a little bit differently about our transportation corridors in and around those spaces in particular. There was some suggestions that came through on the weekend in the comments that I thought were particularly helpful in terms of kind of prioritizing some of the spaces, and it kind of goes back to a lot of the things that were spoken about in the transportation master plan as well as in our strategic planning, which is around that notion of looking at destinations and where people are and where they need to get to. And I think that in the past we've seen some of those destinations as workplaces or economic drivers like places like Conestoga Mall and that kind of thing. But I think we need to be thinking a little bit more broadly about destinations perhaps being shade structures, public parks, and those kinds of places, because as people seek to both physically distance and exercise and get outside and enjoy fresh air in an attempt to not go stir crazy, I think we need to start thinking about those green spaces as important public destinations. And then, of course, I think we also need to be looking forward, if we can, to when the universities and college make different choices around how they want to deliver their programs, because I think that's going to be critically important. If physically distancing remains as important as it is right now, and I suspect it will, we have to start thinking about those destinations and whether or not the width of our sidewalk is sufficient. And if the answer is no, which I suspect in many cases it will be, that we've got to look to those destinations and say, okay, we've got to think a lot differently about some of these particular corridors to be able to allow for people to move efficiently, effectively, and safely between where they're living and where they need to get to. So I think that was kind of my thoughts. Like, there's lots of times where it's easy to look at a really quiet street and say, oh, well, let's put down some pilots here, but really pedestrians don't feel burdened on those really quiet streets to be able to get away from one another, but on the busier streets, they really are struggling. So I think that that's kind of what I wanted to add to the conversation, if that's okay. And certainly happy for Councillor Henry or anybody else to comment on what I've just said. I will be supporting the motion and looking forward to seeing the staff report. I guess I do have a question about the staff report. As everyone said, we want to be nimble in terms of making changes, so we don't want someone to say that there hasn't been a council meeting, so we haven't advanced anything. So I just want to make sure I understand how it is that we're going to be nimble and get this back right away.
Yeah, that was kind of my point, Councillor Freeman, as well, to just do it, so to speak. Cam, do you have any concerns that is there any direction that you're missing today or that would cause any time lag, do you feel?
No. Subject to where, as I noted, if a bylaw needs to be changed, then we would have to come back to council, or if we needed additional funding that we don't have access to, then we might come back. But in my mind, at least, and I would like to confirm if this is comfortable with council, and that is we'd be proceeding. We'd be doing the brainstorming, trying to look at introducing different concepts in different parts of the city that then we could determine whether it is fruitful to expand into other parts of the city or to modify. We'd work with the ward councillor and the mayor as we are before we would implement anything, and then we would simply be preparing briefing notes as we go on this march, if you will, other than, as I noted, where we specifically, by the Municipal Act or the Highway Traffic Act, needed council approval. That was my thought.
Yeah, thank you, Cam. And I would add that in working with the clerk, we can call a special council meeting with about 48 hours notice. So if there's something that was very high priority and needed council input or approval, that we could do that, turn that around in 2 business days. So, okay, thank you. Now I have Councillor Bonagor want to provide some clarity on her comment through Councillor Hanmer's comments, and then Councillor Hanmer has another comment, please, and I'll go to Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, Major Wolski. This is just to follow up on Councillor Hanmer's very good point that there are times where pedestrian crossing buttons are needed. So just to clarify, when I said I very much support going to the region about beg buttons, I think they need to be clearly justified rather than to be considered go-to infrastructure. There are many locations where those buttons make it more dangerous rather than less dangerous to be a pedestrian there. So I just wanted to say, yes, Councillor Hanmer makes a good point that some of them are indeed justified, but that justification should be required up front. I personally, as a city councillor, would be looking to the region and asking them to change this infrastructure to a default no with capacity for an occasional yes.
Great, thank you very much, Councillor Bonagor. Over to Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, through you, and thank you for the clarification, Councillor Bonagor. I do agree that there are certain circumstances that the pedestrian buttons can be more dangerous than they actually are. So I like the idea of there being an approach or some kind of criteria that are put in place as to when the buttons are justified. So that's equally communicated. So thank you for that clarification. My question is probably or more of a comment to Commissioner Rapp, and it's regarding the last part of the motion, which is that staff will work with the ward councillor around any of the changes that are going to happen. I'm also wondering what the communication mechanism might be to the councillors outside of the area. I'm envisioning, again, being a ward that's predominantly on the west side, and King Street being our main uptown area, that any changes in access across King Street is dramatically going to affect potentially those that are on the west side of King Street or on the east side of King Street. And so we just need to be mindful of changes that are coming in and what that communication may be to those outside those areas. It may not really need to have a question, but just something to be mindful of if something's happening in a particular ward, making sure that we are communicating what might be an impact for those around it.
Very good insight there, Councillor Hanmer. Was there a response required from Cam?
No, that's okay. It'll just be a comment because we'll get things back. And I appreciate that we probably will have, as staff are ready to implement different things, we'll have an opportunity through council meetings to be able to do that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of excitement, I think, in Toronto about Lakeshore Boulevard. But if you look at that Lakeshore Boulevard serves one purpose, and that's commuting into Toronto Monday to Friday. It doesn't have transit services on it primarily. It doesn't have ambulance services on it primarily, as opposed to King Street. So we have a lot of differences in our roads. So that'll be an additional challenge for our active transportation staff, for all our transportation staff, to try and figure out along with the region. Councillor Bodley, I think it's now your turn.
Yes, thank you for that, Mayor Jaworski. I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to listen to the very thoughtful questions and comments that the rest of my council colleagues had. I appreciate the motion. I appreciate all the work that Councillor Henry has put into this. I know that he and I had chatted and met with some local advocates on this topic earlier this month, and I really appreciate all of the effort that went into it from Councillor Henry's perspective. The motion is very wonderfully crafted, as many of my colleagues have noted earlier. So a few of the things that I just wanted to highlight personally. I like I really want to highlight the fact that these were our plans to begin with, and from my perspective, I'm looking at this as COVID necessitating the acceleration of some of these plans. As some of my colleagues had noted, in an era of physical distancing, which may be continuing for a long period of time, the fact that we've been working on these plans to accelerate active transportation infrastructure, it's becoming a necessity instead of something that we needed to work towards in the future. So, I mean, when we look at plans that we've had in place for a long period of time and new plans that are coming on board, things like the sidewalk infill policy, things like station area planning, some of our capital projects in this regard, those to me should be sort of the guideposts when we're looking at this from a staff perspective. That's not to suggest that there may not be other things that are important or necessary that fall outside of those boundaries, but I really think looking towards those plans should be the main focus for staff. And in particular, I look at the draft transportation master plan, and knowing that this was probably the last PIC that we may have had for a while, and I know some of my colleagues were at that PIC in middle of March, just before the pandemic really hit. I really felt like the feedback that we were getting from residents at that PIC was positive, and that we were on the right track. And seeing some of the boards at that PIC and the thoughtful questions that were coming from constituents there, which talk about our dedication to active transportation, which talked about Vision Zero and how we were going to implement that, and including talking about lower speed limits. These are all things that us as a council have already committed to, and as I said, I think that COVID is really just the sort of accelerant that we need to move some of these plans forward. I will say that I expressed some caution early on in this conversation when we saw some of the other municipalities around the world sort of acting on this, in the sense that I was very concerned about creating destinations where we're really encouraging people to stay home. Now that we've started to open things up a little bit, I think this becomes even more important. And I would say to the destination comment that we should be trying to create destinations for active transportation for people so that they can get out of their homes while still being able to physically distance. So on the last thing that I just wanted to note was just around a Ward 2 perspective. As sort of Councillor Hanmer was chatting with in the West End here, in the Northwest End in my case, unlike Ward 6 where we have significant park deficiency, or in Ward 7 and also Ward 6 where there's the significant density, we don't have the same level of concerns, and I think that's reflected in the motion that Councillor Henry puts forward. At least myself personally, I will acknowledge our privilege in that regard on this end of the city, that we have an amazing trail system and the ESPA, and we have not nearly as much density to deal with, so it is a little bit easier for us in the suburbs to physically distance. However, we do still have challenges out on this end of the city that may be addressed through this motion, and I speak specifically to Councillor Bonagor's comments around speed limit reductions, in particular the concept of potentially looking at quiet streets. This has been a significant issue for members of Ward 2. I'm looking at a document in front of me right now that has 9 traffic studies that were done in 2019 where the speeds were above tolerance. And the number of requests beyond that where we did traffic studies and speeds were not quite above tolerance would exceed that number significantly. And so the idea that we're going to ask residents to step out into the street or to cycle on a street without any infrastructure for cycling is difficult in some areas of the ward. So I would encourage staff to consider that from a Ward 2 perspective. looking at some of our streets where quiet streets may be appropriate to implement on an interim basis until we have the opportunity to implement fully the Transportation Master Plan recommendations around speed limit reductions, should they come forward. And in particular, with respect to the challenges we're dealing with COVID, those numbers are increasing. The amount of speed challenges, if you follow what WRPS on Twitter, those are increasing, not decreasing. Even though we have less cars on the road, they seem to be going faster. So I think that would also necessitate looking at COVID as an accelerant in that regard. But again, I appreciate Councillor Henry's efforts in this regard, and I will definitely be supporting this motion. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. I think Waterloo Regional Police Service has been so successful in grabbing so many cars and literally taking them off the road that I think it's being followed by other police services in Ontario, the plan that they have. I'll speak now and I'll go back to Councillor Henry to clean up. Councillor Bodley, I'm glad you spent the time writing things down because you really took the words right out of my mouth. About a month and a half ago when this first came up, I think in Milan, we as heads of council locally were very concerned that creating one road would create a destination, and we see that in Toronto. We see that in the park, the one park in downtown Toronto that was oversubscribed, shall we say, on Saturday. That I think people are, the next new message is like, if you're going to be out there and you're going to be in close quarters, you really need to wear a mask. And I think all these things can help be preventative medicine towards the concerns with respect to the pandemic, allow people to get more places, but it can't simply be one place, one destination. I know not one of us has said anything about that. We all say it needs to be spread out throughout the wards because we still want people staying within their own neighborhood as much as possible to make it enjoyable. And I think there's an opportunity for us as councillors to take what we have on our website and to highlight all the trails that we have in our neighborhoods so that people can get around. I would say that using active transportation over the past few weeks, that there are some trails that a good example would be the Spurline Trail, where I would not cycle on it. There's just so many pedestrians on it, doing physical distancing, doing that well, but there's really no opportunity to cycle on the Spurline Trail. It's simply too busy, and that's a great thing. But there's a lot of good neighborhood streets in Mary Allen to take the load off, so to speak, of the trails that we have, so you can cycle there. But I think providing alternatives, highlighting what we have today is key. And I really like to thank Councillor Henry. As everybody has said, this is a well-written motion, and I think it takes the right strategic level, and it literally probably couldn't be better. And with that, I'll turn it over to Councillor Henry.
I'll start by acknowledging and thanking all of my colleagues for the very positive comments about having brought this forward and the crafting of it. I don't think I've received as much praise for something I've written in a long time, and having spent a brief period of time in academia, I was glad to hear no reviewer twos try to tell me how to better understand myself of all of that. So I will take this as the unique opportunity it is to hear some very positive comments, and would say that that only is something for me to reflect back out on the community for all of the advocacy and interest members of the public have expressed, the thoughts and concerns that they've shared, and in listening to all of you, my colleagues, my own experience, but the experiences we've been reading about and hearing about from so many of our residents here and around the world have really shaped what's important and what we need to focus on. I have a few things to say in wrap up here before we take the vote. First, on communications, thank you to Mr. Rapp for clarifying the best way for folks to share ideas and concerns that they're seeing so that the city can consider them. For members of the public, that's letting their councillor know know about them. And for councillors, that's letting Mr. Rapp and our Director of Transportation, Christine Kaler, know about those. And those need to happen quickly for them to be considered quickly, but that can be done on an ongoing basis. Second, just on language use, I know we didn't center on this, but I wanted to highlight it because it is a bit of a change. I know Councillor Henry and I talked about that, and that's taking the pilot or interim design approach to implement these and gather feedback as we go, rather than 6 months to a year of feedback up front. When we say the word pilot, what we mean, based on the NACTO guides, which is the Transportation Commissioners of North America, interim means pilot means we're not sure whether this is a good idea or not. We're going to try it and see. An interim design approach means we think that it is a good idea. We need to do this, but we don't know how to do it well. So we're going to try some things, and we're going to make them better, and then we're going to at some point make them permanent. So to Royce's comments, to Councillor Bodley's comments around using the draft TMP and others as our guide, as I've included, those things that we've highlighted as knowing are going to be a part of our transportation system would likely be things for interim design. Because we know we're going to need to do them, we're just not going to, we need to know how to do them well. And to Councillor Freeman's point about needing more feedback on the TMP, this is actually a very good way to get feedback on some of the proposals in our Transportation Master Plan, because people can start living some experiences of them and they can tell us. And that'll give us, I think, some really quick and really good feedback in a way that nothing that Tony's group or anybody else is going to be able to do can help us with. And the third thing I wanted to comment on was implementation. I appreciate Mr. Rapp's interpretation of this motion as being, just do it and then get feedback as we go, and only come to council for approval of things that legislatively or budgetarily are required. And I think that is important. My expectation is that this is something that we will roll out in phases. There will be some things that staff will identify quickly, and that will roll out quickly. We know that when universities and colleges start making different choices and are able to make different choices about bringing our 40 to 50,000 students back, there will not be enough space in the university district. Our long-term plans in 10 or 15 years, we're rebuilding and recreating roads where it will be possible, but we can't wait that long. And so another phase is going to need to plan for that, and the implementation timeline will have to read the events as they evolve. But we have time to be able to do that. And another phase for this that I think is important is we are hearing the federal government is looking at targeting some infrastructure monies towards addressing rebuilding spaces to deal with COVID, including inactive transportation. So for projects that we might not be able to fund now but know that we need to do, we should be prepared to access those funds and roll that out quickly, especially since they're proposing to fund this up to 80%. And I think that is something that we can think of. So there are multiple levels of this. I don't think the public should expect that everything can happen right away, but we can start to have important things happen right away that have been prioritized, and we can plan for the next phases as the needs arise and as the money becomes available to do more and to do it better. I wanted to relate, one personal story that I think would help. Councillor Freeman, I appreciate your comments about this in recognition that I certainly have, circumstances that are different than many members of our public, and you've highlighted what those are. For us, I would say that, our essential trips, I've been is the only time that I've been on public transit is for those, masked and wearing carts to get to the grocery store or to get to other key places I've had to go in this time. As a car-free household, public transit was our lifeblood. It's how we got around the city, and it is no longer a way that we're getting around the city except where I have to. But my wife and I are now cycling a lot more. She's picked up some secondhand panniers for the back of her bike, so when she does the grocery trips, which she now is doing much more of, she can bike up to Zares at Conestoga Mall, and she can do that because of the infrastructure Councillor Freeman and I helped push the region to include on King Street to be able to get up there safely. And when we are going other places to be able to do physical activity with our toddler this weekend, we were able to bike him down to Waterloo Park, and we felt we could do that because of the new infrastructure that's being piloted along King Street and other things into our core, and the space that was provided by the investments we've made in Waterloo Park along the promenade made it easy to maintain distance, even with a toddler, despite the significant number of people that were coming through there. So the work that we've already been doing has helped us make a choice to be able to continue to use sustainable transportation instead of looking at a personal vehicle. I know my parents are using not both of theirs, and they were offering me the use of one, and we have not taken it because the spaces that have been created in the last couple of years around us means that we don't need it, not right now. That's not true for too many of our residents. And as I center this conversation around equity, many of us talk about the idle time we have at home as we shelter in place. Many people, particularly those who earn less and live in more cramped and dense circumstances, continue to have to go to work so that we can still get groceries, so that we can be safe and healthy in the hospital, so that our community continues to run. And we can't forget those experiences. And that's why, while my story is interesting, their stories matter significantly to make sure that the trips that they have to take to keep the city running, and as more people take them, are trips that are safe and are trips that they can make in a way that is affordable for them and allows us to really continue to meet our community's goals. So those are the things I'd say. There's a side conversation on the bag buttons, on the pedestrian activated control. So just my own brief comment on that, since apparently my comments were put against the regional transportation director in print over the week, that mine perhaps were not thought out. I think council has expressed very clearly what those thoughts are and how they should be. I would remind everyone that is trying to engineer our built environment that you're doing it for people, and the engineered solutions aren't necessarily the ones that people will follow if they don't make sense. To Councillor Bonagor's comments, it has made no sense for me that you have to press a button to get into an LRT station in Uptown. That's nuts, and it shouldn't have to happen. It never should have, and certainly now with the volumes of people that are out there and the much lower volumes of cars, it doesn't make sense. To Councillor Henmer's comments, particularly out in the suburbs, I know the Regional Transportation Director is very concerned with very low-use streets connecting with major arterial roads, and that would cause problems if pedestrians could not activate signals. I understand and take the point, but I would note this. When a car shows up and triggers a signal, a car coming behind is able to use it, but if the pedestrian doesn't get there before the light changes, they don't get a walk signal. They cannot cross, and they are waiting another 5 or 6 minutes, potentially in the rain. So even if these need to be retained in some places so folks can activate it, there are changes that can be made to deal with equity and to deal with concerns and to recognize experience so people can feel like they are respected on our roadways, that the choices they make to be sustainable in the forms of their transportation are the right choices, are good choices, and are supported choices by all levels of government who profess these things in plans. So I think there's a lot more that one can say there, but I will leave it there. So I thank all my colleagues for their support, and I thank in advance Cam, you, and the transportation team's fast work at implementing this, and I thank the community for their advocacy and interest and continued interest as we move forward.
Excellent. I think the way you drove home the value of trips. I think a lot of times people we hear who are against active transportation or bike lanes or those interim bike lanes that we put in through the region talk about the volume of trips, the volume of bikes that they don't see there, rather than the value of the trip. Like driving at home there with your trip to Waterloo Park, you think about where you live, and to get to Waterloo Park, King Street really is an enabler for going with a young one. It actually turns a very busy street into a safe, much safer active transportation street, certainly than it was before. We will do the voting. Let's start with Ward 1.
Thank you. I'm very happy to vote in favor of this motion.
Councillor Bodley, I vote in favor of the motion as well.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic, you may be on mute.
I was having trouble hearing. It was breaking out. Councillor Vasic in favor.
And for kids, Councillor Henry in favor.
And Councillor Bonagor enthusiastically in favour.
And the mayor is in favor too, and very grateful for council's discussion on this. I think gives a lot of clear direction to Mr. Rapp and staff that I think it can be summed up in the just do it, and we'll see what happens. So thank you all very much. That was wonderful. Next up, 13A is correspondence. So we actually have some correspondence here from Spirits Canada, May 16, 2020, regarding municipal liquor policies for bars and restaurants. And in particular, they have 3 requests: permitting licensed bars and patios to expand further into parking lots, permitting liquor consumption in appropriate public spaces, and adopting approvals process that will speed this up. And is there anybody who wishes to speak to that? I see Councillor Bonagor does. Councillor Bonagor, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. So through you, I just wanted to update my council colleagues. Just the BIA, the Uptown BIA, is actively reaching out to Uptown restaurants and bars to find out their appetite for this kind of move. So far, it hasn't been overwhelming by any means. I think the measures that are being requested would work for enterprises that are on those public spaces. For everyone else, it presents some logistical obstacles that are sizable. So just to give you the Ward 7 and Uptown perspective, we are very much in touch with businesses and hoping to have their comments and their feedback so that we can be doing things that are good for our businesses rather than importing ideas that are good for elsewhere but might not work here.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bonagor. I was also talking with Tracy, and I've heard a lot of generic requests. I think people are still, by that I mean business owners are still figuring out what things will look like, and they're really focused on PPE and physical distancing, the basics right now, and haven't given as much thought to how might I expand my business. Do I want to be walking it over there? The takeout seems to be working for them. I haven't heard I don't think I've heard one specific request from broader-based plazas than that, but I certainly have stated publicly that, if people come to us with requests that will help them to bring back their business, we certainly, Tim and I have chatted that we would certainly entertain it. There's a lot of questions here that have to go to the AGCO because they have to approve patio expansions and that, and there's like a 2-month process there, so that would have to be fixed somehow. And I know MPP Mike Harris has been working on that quite diligently for quite some time. Maybe I could ask either Tim or Mark to comment further, or if you want to comment further on this. I think at this point in time, it's more we're open and we're open to ideas. We'll see how they work.
I'll start, Mayor Jaworski. Tim speaking here. I would echo what your comments are. We had a specific request actually through Minto Schneider from the Waterloo Regional Tourism Marketing Corporation, and she's active on our Best WR Business and Economic Support Team of Waterloo Region, and they have certainly been talking and watching some of the other communities around the world with respect to how they're activating reopening efforts in some of the commercial sectors, and that includes some of the expanded patio concepts. So on that note, I do know with respect to the critical infrastructure group, they have activated a subcommittee to look at the City of Waterloo patio guidelines as a bit of a template for the entire region and see how we might use that and utilize it in a COVID-19 nature. And Mayor, as you noted, I think where we can enable and do it safely and still protect the pedestrian zone, which is important in our right-of-ways, I think that's the orientation we're headed toward. But that is an active project, and Cam might want to touch on it more if you want to hear more details on that front. The other piece for us, again, I think, is the public square and our ability to kind of rethink and reimagine how that might be used again in the COVID-19 era. And all as a backdrop is the AGCO requirements for many of the commercial operators. So that's what I would offer right now, and maybe I'll turn it to Cam, and then maybe Mark has a comment too.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. That's correct. The critical control infrastructure group for the region, we have assigned a subcommittee to respond to Minto's request. Director of Transportation or Corridor Planning, I'm not certain of the title, is reaching out to Minto to try and get a few more details, like exactly what the requests are, the nature of it, if you will. City of Waterloo, we've already assigned a person from Economic Development to sit on that committee, but we've also, or I've indicated that we may involve others as well, depending on the nature of the request or the relief that's being asked for. If it gets into private property, then we would want to have someone in planning to help break down any of the barriers or understand the processes that are or may not be needed. If it gets into the right-of-way lands, then we will put someone on transportation. And if it's just dealing with city lands similar to the public square, then we would just let economic development deal with it because they also have parking as well. So we're just waiting to hear back from Minto, I guess, is a little bit more in the details, and we'll make sure we have the appropriate staff that can help advance it, at least from a Waterloo perspective.
And I'll chime in, Council, from a community services point of view. This theme and concept, we're in the investigation mode as well, whether it's through municipal enforcement services, any of our links through our policies on alcohol use in public spaces or facilities. So we're waiting on also the inputs that are coming back from the users, and it was great to receive that update from Councillor Bonagor to help us in this. So multifaceted, many layers across the city, and we're doing our research and staying tuned to any provincial direction and also what the need of the community is, those needs from the community.
Somewhat ironic that now that all the university students are gone, we're considering opening up more drinking in Waterloo, but we'll turn that off once they come back. Over to Councillor Bodley.
Sorry, I was laughing, so I had to wait a second. My question is around not necessarily public space, but the idea of the expanding into parking lots element, which I know Councillor Bonagor had mentioned earlier as well too, and not even necessarily for alcohol reasons, but if restaurants want to look at expanding their space into parking lots, expanding patio space in general, is there anything that we need to do from our end in terms of temporarily waiving minimum parking restrictions for these locations? And is that something that we've contemplated, setting aside the AGCO and the alcohol policy requirements?
I'll turn that over to Cam, I think.
Certainly. Sure. There's a couple of different ways to do it depending on the situation. I've started to think about temporary use bylaws, which could deal with certain uses flowing over into lands that might not be allowed for that type of use. We've also, or when I say we, I've shared with Cambridge some of my thoughts, and that is the Section 40 agreement, which is just an agreement with our council temporarily reducing the parking arrangement or requirement under the zoning bylaw, and that can be for a set period of time. Doesn't cost anything other than the traditional agreement, like $2, exchanging to make it legal. And that probably would be the best course, unless I hear otherwise from council, because then council's at least aware of where this is occurring. And if there are any concerns, that's the time where they can express those concerns and can weave it into the agreement. But those are a couple of the ideas that I've thought of that can help advance it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. And I think that was all the questions I see on that one. We'll move on. Unfinished business. Any questions? Hearing none. New business. Hearing none. Enact some bylaws. I forget where we are, but probably around Ward 3 and 4. We have 4 bylaws here to approve. So I'll go with Ward 3 and 4, please.
Councillor Veith, move the enactment of bylaws and support the motion.
Councillor Freeman, I second the motion and support it.
Continue on with Ward 6, please.
Councillor Henry, in support.
Councillor Bonagor in support.
Councillor Hanmer in support.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
And over to me, the mayor's in support. Thank you. So that carries unanimously. I suppose
Hey, Mayor,
under new business.
it's Councillor. Hello.
Oh, who's going?
Hey, Mayor, it's Councillor Vasic. Councillor Vasic. I'm also in favor.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, I should have mentioned under new business that Doug Wright, one of the founders of the University of Waterloo, passed away this past week, and in his honor, we'll be half-masting. We have half-masted our flag here at City Hall as a great community builder. I think every single one of us has certainly has been touched in some way, shape, or form by the founding of that university, and that will continue to shape us as we go into the future as Canada's education city. So, sad news, a life very well lived. I think his efforts, even at Research in Motion, where he was on the board of directors there and advising Mike, even in his school days, certainly has changed the face of this community. So, sad news on Mr. Wright. Now, we need a motion to go into a closed session, and I'll look towards 5 and 6.
Councillor Vasic, I move to go into a closed session, and I vote in favor of that motion.
Councillor Henry, I second the motion, and I am in favor of the motion.
Councillor Bonagor, I am in favor.
Councillor Hanmer, I am in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
And that leaves it to me. I am also in favor of going into closed session. Do we need for the adjournment? And we also need to adjourn. I kind of forgot where we are. It must be Ward 7 and 1, maybe? 6?
Indeed,
Yeah.
correct. Councillor Bonagor here. I move to adjourn and support the motion.
Councillor Hanmer, I second the motion and vote in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor.
And Councillor Henry in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. We will move into closed session at noon. So time for us to have a bit of a break and get some computers that we're resetting back in shape. Thank you all very much.